Hi guys, and Scale Tony in the garage. I wanted to do my rant about the Zonestar Z5MR2. Now, I bought this through an affiliate link from Practical Printing's channel. He did a review on it, and it looked like an interesting kit because it had a mixing hot end, 2-into-1 mixing hot end, and his experience with it was that it went together fairly well. He had some issues with it, which was the wiring back here on the main board's kind of messy and it's close to the build volume. The wire management's not the greatest, and things like wiring down here at the power supply, there's still ways for fingers to get there. There's no fuse. A couple other things I didn't like is the thickness of this acrylic. This does not snap in because those ears are too short, so it's just kind of stuck in there. So it's not a really well thought out design or well engineered piece of equipment. The motion system is decent on it. I've got a couple prints that came out pretty good. I mean, it's got nice quality once it's up and running, but most of this is just by accident. So let's start at the beginning when I started putting this together. First thing I had trouble with was that the Xinstop, I mean, this is their switch that came with it, but it was missing the acrylic piece that's supposed to go here to mount this end stop for the carriage to come over and home on. So thankfully I have another 3D printer. I made my own end stop. Not that hard. Second thing was that the Zinstop that they provide, let's see if I can put this where you can see it. Okay, so right back here is the Zinstop bracket, and there's supposed to be a bolt that is up here on the carriage, the X carriage, that comes down and contacts this little switch, this little PC board, which was mounted to a little bracket back underneath there. The problem that I had was that this has a 4-pin connector. The wiring that they provided had a 3-pin plug on it, and there are no instructions on how this thing's wired or anything else. The instructions are really bad. But so anyway, I couldn't use this with their wiring, and I didn't have a 4-pin plug to be able to make the plug work because it wouldn't fit in the holder. So I just took this off. I had a micro switch of my own. I printed a little bracket, and I've lost the adjustment, but I sized this a couple times to get it to the right spot, and I can see it's loose right back there now, but anyway, it works. So that was the second issue, trying to put it together. Once I got those two things fixed, I started it up and it ran, but the first thing I noticed was that this plate with this idler on it, the idlers and these rollers were on the other side. It was flipped around, so this idler position is not centered. So with this flipped over, that pushed this idler up here, and that made the belt, it's fine when you're down here, but as you come, or as you're coming closer, the angle for this belt was really wonky, and it was rubbing on the end and teeth were biting in, it would jam up. So I finally figured out that problem and switched everything around and put it on the right way and got that problem fixed. So then the next problem was that when this goes home in the Y, right here, this long arm is supposed to hit on this carriage. Let's see if I can get that. Well, see the carriage roller right here? And there's an acrylic frame. Well, originally, I'm not going to be able to show you that, the arm would come back, and I printed that little spacer that's up in there. Let's see if I can get a shot of that. So I made a little spacer that comes back and hits on the arm. Otherwise, it was going the distance of that spacer until it hit the acrylic, and the acrylic part wasn't hitting on the little roller, it was just hitting on the arm. Now if you look at where the nozzle is when that homes, let's get back here. So if I push that home till I hear it click, okay, and then I bring the nozzle down, you can see the nozzle right here is right at the front edge of the bed. But when I first put this together, it was 20 millimeters in front of the bed. So that's, I had to print that part to make homing possible and get the thing to print on the bed. Otherwise, when it would go forward, if it was homed there, and I set 0 here where the nozzle was, then it would go forward, it would run out of travel before the nozzle got to the back of the bed. So, bad. So that's a flaw. Other mechanical problems, that was probably about it, right? I got the X, the Z, and the Y end stops. So once I got that up and running, things were pretty good. It would print, but what I noticed is, well, here's the original hot end. So this hot end has Teflon or PTFE tubes down inside their throats, and what they're relying on is that these fittings here would push on the ends of the PTFE tubes down inside there, and those would seal to the heat block and provide a gasket seal for plastic, coming back out. Now, down inside of here, you can kind of see it right there, they used some sort of like JB Weld or something like that. It's not, well, it's a pliable sealant on the threads. But that's where it leaked, and I've cleaned it off, but it was just oozing plastic out of here like crazy down both sides and all over the bottom of the nozzle and gooping it up. It wasn't leaking from these little screws that block off the through hole for the nozzle. It was oozing back up around the throats and down the front of it. So I wasn't real happy with that, so I decided to go, the manufacturing quality on this is pretty poor, and I didn't like the way the throats were, so I bought a genuine E3D Cyclops. So it's a E3D nozzle, 2-in-1. The thing's way smaller than this one, and the original, this was a metal bracket, so I designed my own bracket, mounted the hot end on there, used all the stock hardware other than I used some machine screws to mount it. This setup with the stock fans is 23 grams lighter than their hot end with the shroud and all that sort of setup. So it eliminates a lot of weight. Doesn't leak a bit. But the next thing that I found was that I was having under extrusion issues. So the blue part here is nice and tight, and then when it gets to the white, you can see that this, and maybe you can't see that, but the outer shell here is separate. It didn't, see, it's separate from the rest of the model because it's under extruding. Now, this is their variegated pig, or what, color changing pig, because it varies the amount of filament through the nozzle continuously, or from each side continuously, as it prints the model. And you can see that it, at some point, it stops the blue, and there's a separation right there. It switches over to completely the other nozzle. But what I was finding was that it was under extruding on one side. Well, it turns out that their firmware is not actually adjusted for 2 extruders. So even though they have 2 extruders, from the front panel, you can change flow rate and you can change steps per millimeter, but it only affects extruder 0. It never does anything for extruder 1. So no matter how much you fiddle with their controls on the front panel, you can never get it to extrude properly. And when I did a calibration test with this extruder set up with their stock gearing, it's got the big gear on it, and then I bought some Mark 8 extruder gears and built my own brackets and levers and stuff to try and get more torque out of it, because this gear was skipping a lot even with the old extruder. So my thought was that this was just too big, that this motor couldn't push it. Anyway, had the same problem with the Cyclops that I did with the leaky hot end. It was that it was under extruding, and I couldn't figure out why. So I finally did took the Bodum tubes loose, fed 100 millimeters of filament through it, was only getting 95 millimeters. So I adjusted the steps on this one, and then tested the same thing on this one, and the steps, even though I had it updated in the firmware and sent it back to the EEPROM, it didn't update this one. So it needs to be reflashed, and I need to figure out what's going on with their firmware, why the extrusion steps are not updating for the second extruder. And then the third thing that I found, so once I got it used it a little bit, these 2 wires, which are the wires that are bringing power, is the power in from the power supply. There was a bad crimp here, and these were getting really hot. The heat bed connections were not getting hot. The hot end connections, not getting hot at all. But this power supply connections, it actually, I've changed it out. I put new crimps on there, but this was actually discolored on both of these from heat. So that's something to watch if you got one of these things. And I really can't recommend this printer as a kit. It's not really complete. Where yes, it will print kind of, sorta, but they really need to up their game to sell more of these things if they want to stay in business. So the complaints about it are, one, that the wiring and fact that it might overheat, but the firmware in this hot end really suck, and Mechanically, the motion system's okay. This is a bit wobbly, but not bad. If you have one, watch for flat spots on the rollers that will cause this to ride up and down as it moves back and forth. But you can swap around some of the wheels, you know, off of the X carriage, the idler end or whatever, that don't need, you know, they're not going to move the hot end as much as the bed. You can swap those around and get it to and roll pretty smoothly. And once you do that, this is pretty reliable. But yeah, cannot recommend this. Funny thing is that they don't even, if you go to Zonestar's website, the Z5 is not even listed as a past product that they ever made. It's now known as a D805. I assume that they're still all shipping with the same firmware, and I don't know, nobody's come up with a solution for that, but if you visit the Zonestar Facebook group, you'll see me in there, and me and another guy are working on getting a fix for it. We'll let you know how it turns out, but stay away from this model. See you later, guys.